Today, we're talking about something that many of us have faced in this hobby, burning out and those ever-increasing piles of shame. But, just like the Astartes, have no fear. Because I will share with you my first-hand experience of how I deal with just those issues, as well as bring new life into old projects. But to put it all simply, I'm going to be painting up some Black Templars. First things first, let's talk about Burnout. It happens to the best of us. 1 minute you're really hyped about starting a new army, and then it feels like a mountain you cannot climb. My advice? Just pause and breathe. Break your projects into small, manageable chunks. See this? My old Space Marine force from Leviathan. It's been gathering dust for far too long, as they will eventually going to be for my White Scars, but currently they didn't really fit into my army, and also they didn't have a playstyle that I liked for them. So instead of them just sitting there collecting dust, let's beat that hobby block by making something new from something old. Let's start by giving these guys a paint job that they truly deserve. And I'm thinking something black.
Does it come in black?
I've decided on painting up and getting ready a 2,000 point army of Black Templars. Ready for their eternal crusade, bringing about the Emperor's wrath to cleanse the stars of the alien, the mutant, and the heretic. While we're painting, consider this. Set yourself realistic goals. The Emperor's palace wasn't built in a day, and neither are your armies. Pick one model or a small unit and focus on them. For this, I'll be using an Infernus Marine. Remember, starting something is half the battle, so let's get into painting. First up, let's go through how to make those dynamic bases. Begin by gluing some corkboard onto your base. Once that's secure, tear off small pieces around the edges to create natural rock faces. You can use your fingers or a hobby knife for this. A pro tip is I like to cut around the top of the base so nothing hangs over the rim, ensuring a smooth finish. Next, take those small pieces you've torn off and glue them around the base for added detail. Feel free to shape them as much as needed, and also don't throw away any leftovers as they're perfect for future projects. Now, cover the base with Vallejo's Dark Earth, making sure to fill in all those cracks and crevices. With a damp paper towel, clean up the rim of the base, and then I also like to stipple the Dark Earth with a brush to add some rough texture. And just like that, you have a fantastic base with minimal effort. Moving on to painting, I secure my marine onto a plastic shot glass using some blue tack. These shot glasses also double as mixing cups, which I find to be super handy. For the next steps, I'll be using my airbrush for convenience, especially when priming the model black. Once the primer is dry, I apply some Vallejo German Grey to the raised surfaces of the armor. This can also be achieved with a dry brush, and you won't notice much of a difference in the final result. I paint the entire base with scale colors brown leather, then following up with some Vallejo Cavalry Brown just on the top surfaces, so leaving some of that rich brown in the shadows. Don't worry if you get any on the model's feet, as it will enhance the weathered look later on. Now for some dry brushing. Grab some Dark Reaper on a paper towel and load it about halfway up the bristles of a flat brush. Wipe off most of the paint until there's almost none left. And with a light touch, brush over the armor's surface to build up those highlights. Once that's done, switch to Fenrisian Grey and repeat the process on the sharpest edges. To add some depth, I use some German Grey to smooth out any of those raised areas that got too much paint, and also I go in to enhance the recessed details. For the base, I go in with a heavier dry brush of Troll Slayer Orange. Then I mix some rust pigment powder with water to create a wash and apply it all over the base. While it's still wet, I add a little bit more powder for a stronger effect on all the flat surfaces. Once everything is dry, I sprinkle pigment powder straight over the top of the base and also on the model's feet. Now do be careful with this stuff as it can get really messy, and it also turns into paint if it touches anything that's wet. As you can probably tell by this stage, I'm heavily inspired by John Blanche's iconic artwork from 3rd edition. Whenever I hear Black Templars, this is what I imagine. Now, for the shoulder pads and the Imperialis, I use Sky Grey. I apply about 3 to 4 thin coats to achieve a nice smooth finish. Highlight the Imperialis with some off-white and finish off the edges with some pure white. For the shoulder pads, you can either airbrush on some off-white in the top parts of the armor plate to create a nice gradient, or you can paint it on with a brush, blending between the sky grey and the off-white. Now this is all up to you, because once we put on some transfers and do some weathering, you won't be able to tell a difference between the two. Speaking of transfers, I apply a gloss varnish to the shoulder pads, then using some decal set to position the black crosses. I press them down with a paper towel to eliminate any air pockets. Once dried, seal everything in with a matte varnish to make the transfers blend seamlessly into the model. For some weathering, I take a small piece of sponge, dab it in sky grey, and gently press it onto the shoulder pads to create chipping. I then enhance these chips and add scratches using some off-white. I then fix up any excessive chipping with some black paint. Time to paint the eye lenses, starting with corn red. Glaze up with Mephiston red and then Evil Sun Scarlet towards the inner part of the lens. Highlight the bottom edge with Troll Slayer orange, finishing off with a white dot in the outer top corner, replicating some glint of light. Using lead belcher, I cover all the metallic parts, including the power pack and the weapon. Following up with a wash of Agrax Earthshade. For the Pyre Blaster, I paint the outer parts with Mephiston red, then highlighting all the raised areas with Evil Sun Scarlet. And then edge highlighting with Tau Light Ochre. For the barrel and the skull on the fuel tank, I will be using AK's metallics, starting with rusty gold, then highlighting up with old gold. Followed by a wash with Guilliman Flesh contrast. I paint the purity seals with Xantry Dust. Followed by a watered down brown leather, which I use to paint in all the recesses. I then further highlight with a 50-50 mix of Xantry Dust and off-white. Which then I'll finish with an edge highlight of pure off-white. For the wax, I'll be using Pink Horror, topped with then Flesh Tearer's red contrast paint. Using a very fine brush with a fat belly, I carefully paint on the writing. If you do make a mistake, you can always fix it by using some off-white and painting stripes across the black lines. For the leather, I apply straight off-white, leaving it a bit rough to create a texture. Then I go in with snakebite leather contrast for that natural weathered look. I also then finish it with a matte varnish to sort of counteract the satin semi-gloss look that contrast paint can leave behind. Using Leviathan purple contrast paint through an airbrush, I spray on to create a burnt effect at the end of the Pyreblaster. You can also use thinned down Leviathan purple and glaze it up with a brush for the exact same effect. The more coats of the purple, the darker it becomes, so be very careful. To add battle damage, I use some lead belcher to edge highlight areas that would naturally wear and tear from combat. Take your time here, sometimes less is more. Finally, paint the rim of the base black and your Infernus Marine is ready to embark on his eternal crusade. Tackling that pile of shame can be incredibly hard and overwhelming, but start with prioritizing. Go through your collection, categorize what you want to finish and what can wait. It's okay to let some things go. If you're still feeling buried in plastic, just remember why you started, whether it's from the love of the lore, the thrill of the game, or the sheer joy of painting. Reignite that passion. Sometimes revisiting an old project like this can remind you of why you love the hobby. And there you have it, folks, an old project that's on its way of becoming something new. Remember, the journey is just as important as the destination. Embrace each step, and soon your pile of shame will turn into a display of pride. If you've enjoyed this video, hit that like button and subscribe for more awesome Warhammer related videos. And also share your own struggles and victories in the comments, or please join our Discord, link will be down below. To the community of painters, players, and Warmasters, thank you so much for joining me today. Your enthusiasm and support fuel this channel and our shared passion for the grimdark. That is Warhammer 40k. Until our next adventures across the warp, I'll see you Warmasters next time.